the business cycles.
People stay and leave jobs because of relationships. A Gallup poll of over 1 million people found that 75% of workers who voluntarily left their jobs did because of a bad boss and not the position of the company. So this plays a greater role in quitting than pay and or lack of opportunities for advancements. But what about the other relationships that bind us to jobs? I can imagine that if you're listening, you can immediately start thinking of your in the trenches colleagues and work spouses who represent some of your most significant day-to-day relationships. We spend so much time with these people. Most of us spend around a third of our waking lives at work. Add your commute and all the activities that support your career, and we get closer to 50%. That's a lot. But is all the time together artificially inflating the so-called closeness of our work friendships?
After 3 decades, I've met a lot of people throughout my career, many of whom I thought I knew really well. With a career span like this, it's likely you'll have been a witness to weddings, births, divorces, and even deaths. I've been to weddings with people who are now divorced and sent baby gifts to people whose children are now graduating college. Years ago, a woman I sat with at lunch every day died of a heart attack at her desk. She was 29, same age as me, and had a 3-year-old daughter who would be 24 today. It took years for me to land on a true definition of friendship and to reflect on the lessons learned through numerous work relationships. The phrase, the good, the bad, and the ugly feels to be an apt expression here. Let's cover the good first. Of my trusted inner circle of intimate friends, meaning the people who have the capacity to receive me as my authentic, vulnerable, uncensored self, nearly all are comprised of former coworkers. In all cases, work was not an enabler to the relationship. These were not trauma bonding relationships. I was more interested in getting to know who they were as people, rather than focusing on rehashing our shared work experiences. Also, in all cases, the friendships became more solidified after one or both of us left the job where we met. Finally, in all cases, the friendships lasted because both parties grew and evolved beyond who we were when we first met, including outgrowing roles we had originally occupied. These relationships became emotionally intimate friendships because they were about supporting one another through our respective journeys of self-discovery and transformation. Now here's the bad, or maybe more realistic example. Most of the people I've befriended at work were point-in-time friends. I may have known them outside of work and even met their families. If any were to reach out and suggest dinner today, I would go out of my way to make it happen. But I wouldn't be surprised if the effort wasn't reciprocated. Sometimes the reasons are complex. People going through their own stuff, limited amount of time, or mental energy. In other cases, people aren't geographically near, and neither party is investing in travel to maintain emotional bonds. But the most common reason why these aren't friendships is because they never were. When point-in-time work friends cease to work together, it reveals their true nature, that of professional acquaintances, not friends. There's no need to look at this cynically or with anger or even sadness. Most people come into our lives for a season or two. Perhaps we're lucky to have them for several chapters of our life. But these are rarer occurrences. Making friends at work is like making friends at school. We find each other sharing a specific place and time, and we form bonds and context to our persona at this time. As a student, a worker, a boss, making the jump to a real relationship requires mutual investment and compatible emotional capacities which are able to withstand change over time. Though it is possible to make real friends at work, it also comes with risks worth considering. Which leads me to the ugly example. I was working in a very reputable organization as a leader in a highly visible role. I interacted with the most senior level of the organization and had made several very strong alliances there. My boss was fired and replaced with a woman who had worked in the company for many years in the same role. I liked her immediately and opened up to her. Maybe a little too fast. I invited her to my home for dinner, and she met my family. I was excited about having a strong female boss whom I could look to for mentorship and development advice. Several months later, I found myself growing uncomfortable with the behavior of one of the executives we both worked with. He was known as being a fun and outgoing party guy, but was making sexual advances and comments which were moving well outside the realm of appropriateness. One evening, my boss and I went to dinner, and I told her everything. She was kind and helpful and offered me some suggestions on how to handle the situation with this person she had known well. Shortly after, I ran into the guy while getting coffee in the office. He turned to me with hatred in his eyes and gave me a nasty look up and down before turning to walk away without saying a word. I came to realize that my boss had shared everything with him, and I was devastated. I hadn't considered that she might use what I had told her in confidence to her political advantage. But this is exactly what happened. She destroyed my relationship with an influential executive and improved hers by using my information as political capital to share with him to prove her loyalty and value. This experience taught me the importance of being more patient and more cautious. You shouldn't need to hide things from your real friends. Unfortunately, in highly political work environments, everything is fair game with many people.
Oh my gosh, Mary. This example, I can imagine that the listeners feel the same way I do, which is like you hear that story and there's just a resonance in it. Whether or not you had that exact experience, that's not the point. It's like there's aspects of that, and kind of like resurfacing those is super evocative. I will say that a very formative experience for me was as far as the ugly part of friendship, is my first job at around 8 years old was picking strawberries for 25 cents a quart. And another little girl who I thought was a friend said, "Let's team up and fill one of these cardboard flats together." And I think I was enjoying like the camaraderie as much as the idea of, making 50 for a couple hours of work or whatever. I don't know, like probably an hour or whatever. So I felt well on this 8-year-old. And then the shock and betrayal when she took the flat of our combined strawberries and took credit for all of them. And that stayed with me. I think I've told that story in professional events because it really shaped me. And in sales, if you're not careful, I work in certain environments, like so-called friends will snipe your deals. When I sold medical devices 20 years ago, another rep on the team, who was also buddies with our boss, claimed one of my deals was his because the surgeon I'd worked with also performed surgeries in his territory, and the boss gave it to him. So, one of the things, when we're talking about friendship here is, to your point, is being cautious.
Your story was also alarming because of the child labor aspect of it, Katie. I don't know. I couldn't get past the you're working at 8 years old, you're doing manual labor, but okay. Well,
yeah, it's really, I don't know. Like when I'm like, it was hours. I think it was probably like minutes, but still, yeah, it was a little farm next to our house where you just would go. And I think the way the story played out is it was like pick your own strawberries. And I think they did something kind of cute for kids where they said, "We'll pay 25 cents for you to." It was like my mom dropped me off at daybreak and picked me up at dusk. It was more like, I think, just this kind of like fun thing for kids to do. But I think that it was this thing that was like, it was so exciting to me. I mean, it's kind of meta because it's sort of the whole thing where it's like the friendship. It's like, oh, this is the thing that matters the most, when at the end of the day, even in that case, it was just business.
Just business, little girls. Hang tight, psychos. We'll be right back.
As a sales leader, this may be surprising for people in the know, but my work besties have been the heads of marketing I work uncharacteristically closely and affably with marketing compared to the typical adversarial dynamic in most organizations. But some examples, when I worked overseas, the head of marketing was my emotional lifeline. And also, I'm having dinner next week with head of marketing from another company. But to your point, these were point in time relationships, regardless of how closely we work together and how much a role these folks had in sustaining my day-to-day life, and even in a way creating some sense of sort of like emotional fulfillment in highly charged environments. In more recent decades, I've experienced several professional betrayals or disappointments with people I'd mistakenly considered authentic relationships. But the ones that have hurt the most were the people I developed professionally who went on to, either stab me in the back or attempt to step over me. In more than one case, I've mistaken ambition for loyalty and even personal connection. One example is a person I worked with closely and developed into a formidable enterprise sales level executive. And when I went away on vacation, they quit and left the company for a role making 2 times the money. I would never hold someone back from the opportunity to advance. But the fact that they avoided me after I developed them was something I took personally at the time. And I'll say in this particular case, I remember they made me an elaborate craft project that they left on my desk. So there was at least some sense of guilt that was being expressed. If I were to explain the craft project, it would be too identifying. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to use the example also that is identifying enough that it could get me in trouble, but it's related to being a boss and forming bonds with your direct reports. And in this case, someone who reported to one of my directs, and this fits the ugly. In this particular case, this person worked for me at a company where I had recognized them as an intern, brought them into my organization and promoted them. When I left that company, they had called me crying hysterically. I was heartbroken to hear how disappointed they were. And quite frankly, I kind of expected it, but it still really affected me. I moved to the new company. I was building the sales organization from the ground up. And when the time came, they joined and worked for a VP who reported to me. At the time, I was incapable of seeing my inappropriate favoritism and emotional attachment. Not only was the person whip smart, I liked them, like really actually adored them. A few brave people would point out to me that I had a blind spot that wasn't fair or appropriate. Their boss was on my leadership team, and this person seemed to have more of a direct line of communication to me than he did. And there are many examples that I could provide, but if you take the mix of their ambition and my love for their talent and charm, it was like bleach and ammonia, and people around it were breathing the fumes. So how this ended was I left the company. I didn't join another company in this case. I went on to do another project, and I immediately stopped hearing from them. So one of the people who had been brave enough to tell me the truth before let me know that this person had used the information their closest to me had provided them to claim that my work had been theirs as they grabbed and achieved a higher position. So when this happened, I had a lot going on. So there wasn't time to lick my wounds about it, but I experienced this as a personal loss. But the reality is that there never was an actual relationship beyond the professional one. And, as we continue to explore in this podcast, clear boundaries, and in this case, reporting structures, are our friend.
Wow. Yeah, I'm vicariously feeling hurt on your behalf as I listen to this. And I'm glad you shared this example with a direct report or someone in your team, right? A more junior person. We both discussed like how we've often given too much of ourselves to our jobs on the show, and how maybe sometimes we've made it more personal than it should be. I think your story is a great reminder, like that we can't be friends with our directs, right? Like it's just it just breaks a healthy professional boundary. I kind of think of it like the therapy model in the counseling room. Like therapists don't break the therapeutic frame. They're not allowed to have a relationship with you outside of the counseling room. I think primarily, and there's probably a whole lot that goes into that, but primarily the power and control dynamic is just too significant. And like you and I, Katie, we're friends, and now we're work colleagues. But like I can imagine when a relationship has a power dynamic and a friendship, being the boss, it's really almost impossible not to be unbiased, right? Like it's just the objectivity I mean, we're human beings, and even if you're superhuman and you can like dissociate yourself and play that role, like to your point, none of your other directs are going to believe it. They're going to smell it immediately. And what I found interesting in your example is that it went a different way. Like I was expecting, like, you know, oh, like you maybe in retrospect was super unfair, but you actually, your vulnerability as a friend to a direct gave them an opportunity to have power in the professional realm. It's like, even based on how they behaved, it seems like that was their probably primary objective, which is really hurtful. And
absolutely.
You know, in hyper competitive environments, people, they're going to do and say whatever they need to get ahead, which is so hard to imagine when you're a loving, kind person and you just really want to like people. And you're just like, you know.
Yeah. And for me, it's such a huge motivation to support the development of people. And I think now that I have matured and grown to the point that you're talking about, that I pay particular attention when I'm working with a team about whether I personally like the person or not, and make sure to override that. The importance of not favoring people out of personal preference, that they're people that I find more likable or more enjoyable, that I really focus more on what my function is, which is to make them successful and ultimately to support the success of the company and the organization. And I will say that has made life easier, which is, was counterintuitive. I thought my superpower had a lot to do with these connections I was making with people, especially earlier in my career. And yes, there is a little bit of a cost in terms of, some of the level of connection and commitment. But I think the return on investment, as far as the amount of energy and drain that it puts, is absolutely, like, there's no case to be made for it. It's absolutely redefining what the job is as a boss, which is to have the best interest of the entire organization in mind and get out of the way with my own personal needs for fulfilling, and like my interest in having friendships with interesting people, smart people, driven people that are like me. So yeah, it's a thing.
Hey, fellow psychos, if you enjoyed the show, please click like, subscribe, and share it with other psychos you know. We'd also love to hear from you, so please hit us up on our socials. We're at Business Psychos Pod on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook.